They came at 7:43 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was still in my kitchen, half awake, pouring my second cup of coffee when my dog started going absolutely crazy at the back window. I figured it was a squirrel, maybe a stray cat. But when I pulled back the curtain, what I saw made my stomach drop straight to the floor. There were 3 men standing in my backyard. One of them was holding a crowbar. Another had a sledgehammer resting on his shoulder like he was about to go to work. The third was measuring something on his phone, taking photos of my shed. My shed. The one I had spent 4 months planning, 6 weekends building, and every last dollar of my home improvement budget constructing with my own 2 hands. I didn't even put on shoes. I ran straight out the back door in my socks. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" I shouted across the yard. The man with the crowbar turned around completely unbothered. He had a clipboard in his other hand. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "We're here on orders from the HOA. This structure is unauthorized and needs to come down today." I felt every nerve in my body go electric. I had lived in this neighborhood for 6 years. I had paid my HOA dues every single month without missing one payment. I had followed every rule in that 47-page handbook they sent me when I first moved in. And now 3 strangers were standing in my yard with demolition tools, acting like they had every right in the world to be there. But here's the thing they didn't know. I had a folder inside my house, a very important folder. To understand why this was happening, you need to understand Margaret. Margaret had been the HOA president of our neighborhood for 11 years. 11 years. And in that time, she had made it her personal mission to control every single thing that happened within a 2-mile radius of the community entrance sign. The color of your shutters, the height of your grass, the type of potted plants you were allowed to keep on your front porch. Margaret had an opinion on all of it, and more importantly, Margaret had the authority to enforce all of it. She and I had gotten off on the wrong foot almost immediately. 2 years ago, she had sent me a formal written notice that my mailbox post was aesthetically inconsistent with neighborhood standards. I wrote back politely, explained that it was brand new, and offered to repaint it. She escalated it to a committee vote anyway. I won the vote 4-1. Margaret did not forget that. Then, last spring, I decided to build a shed in my backyard. Not some massive structure, just a 12 by 16-foot storage shed to hold my lawn equipment, tools, and some old furniture I hadn't found the heart to donate yet. I had a perfectly reasonable spot for it in the back corner of my property, surrounded by trees completely out of sight from any street. The moment I started the planning process, I knew I had to do this right. Not just HOA right, but legally right, so I contacted the city first. I applied for a building permit, submitted my structural plans, had them reviewed and approved. It took 8 weeks and cost me nearly $400 in fees, but I got it done. Then I submitted my application to the HOA Architectural Review Committee. Margaret rejected it in 3 days. Her stated reason? The shed's proposed roof pitch was not in harmony with existing structures on the property. I pushed back. I requested a full committee review. The committee reviewed it, asked me to adjust the plans slightly. I adjusted them, and they approved the project unanimously. Margaret, as president, was overruled by her own committee. Construction took 6 weekends. The shed turned out beautifully. And for about 4 months, everything was quiet. Then came the morning of the crowbar. I walked up to the lead worker, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my heart was hammering like a drum. "Before you touch one single board of that shed," I said, "I need to see your authorization paperwork." The man with the clipboard paused. He pulled out a letter, an official-looking HOA document, signed by Margaret herself, that declared my shed was an unapproved structure and authorized its immediate removal under Section 14 of the community bylaws. I read it carefully. Then I said, "Okay, give me 2 minutes." I went back inside. I opened the drawer in my home office, and I pulled out the folder. Inside that folder was everything: the city building permit, stamped and approved, the HOA Architectural Review Committee's written approval, signed by 4 of the 5 committee members, email correspondence showing every step of my application process, photos I had taken during construction, time-stamped and documented. And one final document that I had requested from my attorney after Margaret's initial rejection, a 2-page letter outlining my legal rights as a property owner regarding approved structures. I walked back outside and handed the entire folder. To the lead worker, he flipped through the first few pages. Then he stopped. He looked up at me. He looked back down at the papers. He handed them to the second worker, who read them and then slowly set his sledgehammer down on the grass. There was a long silence. "Sir," the lead worker finally said, "we can't touch this." He wasn't rude about it. He wasn't aggressive. He actually looked almost relieved. "We were told this was an unauthorized build, but this permit is valid and that committee approval is in writing. I'm not demolishing a legal structure. That's not what we signed up for." He took out his own phone and started making a call. I later learned he called Margaret directly. I wasn't close enough to hear her side of the conversation, but I could see the expression on his face change from neutral to deeply uncomfortable. He hung up. He picked up his equipment, and all three of them walked back through my gate and left. Ama thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. Within 48 hours, I received a new letter from the HOA. This time it wasn't about demolition. It was a formal fine, $1,500, for failure to maintain compliance during the construction period, and a claim that my shed exceeded the maximum allowable square footage for accessory structures under the bylaws. My shed was 192 square feet. The bylaw maximum was 200 square feet. Margaret was not done. I consulted with my attorney, who reviewed the bylaws, reviewed my original approval documents, and pointed out something fascinating. The committee that approved my project had the authority to grant exceptions to dimensional requirements, and their written approval, the same one I had shown the demolition crew, explicitly noted that my structure was approved as submitted. No exceptions were needed, but even if they had been, the committee had the power to grant them. We sent a formal response to the HOA board, rejecting the fine and demanding a full board hearing. Under the bylaws, I was entitled to one. Margaret had no choice but to schedule it. The hearing happened on a Thursday evening in the community clubhouse. I showed up with my attorney, my folder, and 23 years of patience that I had finally run completely out of. I presented everything, the permits, the approvals, the timeline, the correspondence. And then my attorney stood up and quietly explained what the legal exposure looked like if the board chose to pursue this any further, not just for the HOA, but potentially for Margaret individually, given that she had authorized the entry onto my private property and directed a demolition crew to destroy a legally permitted structure. The board voted 4-1 to dismiss the fine. Margaret cast the one vote to keep it. 3 weeks after that hearing, Margaret announced she would not be seeking re-election as HOA president. The board sent me a written apology. They also quietly amended the HOA policies to clarify that city-issued building permits, combined with committee approval, constitute full authorization for residential structures. No more gray areas, no more room for one person to override committee she chairs. My shed is still standing. Every morning when I walk outside, I see it sitting exactly where I built it, perfectly level, solid as ever, holding my tools and my memories, and a quiet sense of satisfaction that I cannot fully put into words. But here's what I want you to take away from this story, because this happens more than you think. HOAs have real power, but that power has real limits. And the single most effective thing you can do when you're dealing with any kind of dispute, whether it's a homeowners association, a landlord, a contractor, or anyone who shows up claiming authority over your property, is documentation. Get your permits, read your bylaws, keep every email, take photos, know what approvals you have in writing, and know exactly where those papers are at all times. Because when 3 men showed up in my backyard with a crowbar, I wasn't protected by anger or by how loud I could argue. I was protected by a folder. That folder cost me about 8 months of patience and $400 in permit fees. It saved me an estimated $12,000 in structural loss, potential legal fees, and the complete destruction of something I had built with my own hands. If you're dealing with an HOA, a difficult neighbor, or any situation where someone is trying to override your rights, do the work up front. Document everything. And never, ever let anyone convince you that a powerful position is the same thing as a legal right, because sometimes all it takes is 2 minutes, a folder, and the look on a demolition worker's face when he realizes he almost made the worst mistake of his week.